Hello all, and welcome to another episode of the Left Hook podcast. I'm joined by my esteemed co-host, Jordie.
G'day, mate.
How are you, mate?
Good, yourself?
Fantastic, as always.
Nice.
Here on the Left Hook podcast, we're here to bring you guys some independent political commentary and analysis, and countering the mainstream media right across with a strong left hook. This week's episode, it's quite nutritious, jam-packed, full of healthy stories. What have you got cooked up on the menu today, Jordie?
Well, mate, have I got some interesting stories for you. We
Yes.
will be doing our deep dive into the AUKUS military pact.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because our first episode actually was on AUKUS.
It was on AUKUS,
so
yes.
I thought we should go back to and explore our roots.
that topic.
Explore the roots of the podcast and go back to AUKUS because there's been some interesting developments.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have a look at the ongoing housing crisis
Mhm.
and how that is tied somewhat
Mhm.
into AUKUS.
Yeah, that makes
Just
sense.
A general kind of analysis of what's going on in the Australian economy.
Fantastic.
And then you've been doing a little bit of research into something that just previously happened overseas, have you not?
Yes. We're also going to be looking at breaking news as well. The crushing landslide defeat of Labor in the Northern Territory to the Country Liberal Party,
Yep.
which is quite an interesting turn, as they've been in power there for 2 terms. And then we're going to be looking at a recent revolution and change of power in Bangladesh. Maybe some of the little things that have been at play, some of the factors at play, and also some of the consequences and how that can essentially shape the kind of the wider geopolitical position of the region as a whole. Yeah, mate. So AUKUS, when I first heard about it, Jordie, I thought it might have possibly been the worst deal in history, but you're telling me that it's gotten even worse.
It just keeps getting worse.
Ooh, fantastic. Yeah.
What I'll say, first of all, is that we are critical of AUKUS.
Yeah.
And we're not critical of AUKUS because we don't think that you should have a military per se or
No.
be able to defend your country. The reason we're critical of AUKUS is because it is denying Australia strategic and military autonomy. It impedes on our sovereignty, and the price tag is astronomical. It is overinflated, and it ultimately will wed us to the hip of American imperial
Machinations, shall
expeditions
we say.
in the future.
Of
That's
course.
what we're concerned about, and a whole lot of other people that I read are very concerned about, and rightly so.
Yeah,
So,
and we're patriotic Australians. We both love our country and want essentially the best thing for
Well,
our country.
And this is not the best thing
No.
whatsoever.
No.
So what I'll start off by saying, I'll just give a rundown of
Yes.
the timeline,
Yep.
which I have found fascinating. So first phase of AUKUS
Yeah.
is going to be the stationing of US Virginia-class submarines in Western Australia.
Correct.
And that will be by 2027.
And so these aren't our submarines, though.
No.
So these aren't the ones that we're buying.
No.
Yes.
So we'll get there.
We'll get
bit by
there,
bit.
yeah.
There's a lot to unpack. A lot.
Goodness.
We are really delving into the weeds.
Oh, goodness.
So by 2027, there will be US-owned and manned Virginia-class submarines being stationed off Perth.
Yeah.
We will be paying to upgrade our maritime facilities to dock the submarines.
Yep.
And we will be, at the moment, from my understanding, is taking the nuclear waste from the submarines and dealing with it and storing it here in Australia.
Are there any long-term plans for the storage of nuclear waste, Jordie?
So-
Has there been anything concrete discussed?
So we will be storing it on site where the submarines are docking until there are other facilities constructed and developed in the future. And the reason that is because none of our political class can announce where said facilities are going to be because they know of the backlash that will come.
Well, obviously, it's not going to be in Peter Dutton's electorate or Anthony Albanese's electorate.
Or Peter Dutton's electorate. It's definitely not.
I can't wait till I walk out to get my morning newspaper and in the horizon there's just a massive glowing tank of radioactive waste looking down on me.
Okay, so where the waste will be stored long term will be a contentious point because any government, whether it's the current Labor government or a future Liberal government, regardless, when they announce where this is going to be, they are going to be grilled from all sides of the spectrum because no one's going to want to have nuclear waste in their backyard.
No, and nuclear, correct me if I'm wrong, Jordie, but currently in Australia, nuclear power and all proliferation of all of all types is outlawed. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I think the grade. Okay, I'm not a nuclear expert. Or
I am.
scientist here.
I am. So good thing. Yeah.
I'm
I'll correct you. Don't worry.
My understanding is that the nuclear material is similar. The nuclear waste material is similar to what is produced in the healthcare sector.
Ah, of course. Yeah. For
But
like your X-ray machines,
Correct.
etc. That sort of stuff. Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure this waste also has a longer lifespan.
Well, that's good.
Much more.
Yeah.
So that's why there's going to have to be new facilities built to store the waste.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's the first stage. That's
Yeah.
stage one. We're going to have the Yanks with their submarines here in Perth,
Mm.
and we will be paying to upgrade our facilities to have the Yanks here stationed.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, I guess, they can feasibly project power from Australia now with
Yeah.
their submarines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's stage one. Stage two
Mm.
is by 2032,
Mm.
we are going to have between 2 and 8 submarines.
Mm. So this is will have received
Correct.
between 2 and 8
Between
submarines.
2 and 8.
Yeah.
Quite a jump there between 2 and 8.
Yeah.
Anywhere in between.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these will be, wait for it, second-hand Virginia-class submarines that the Americans already have.
Wow.
These will not be new boats that they have specially built for us.
For Australia.
With a brand new ribbon for us to pull and
Yeah,
untie. These
yeah.
will be second-hand boats.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Every single used car salesman
Yeah.
should be outraged. They
They
have not
should.
thought up of this.
They should. So
yeah.
what they'll probably do is they will pull some of their submarines out of
Mhm.
dock. They'll wind back the odometer,
Mm.
put some new tyres on it, and then give it to us.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Flush the coolant. Yeah.
That's right.
Maybe. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Bit of a fresh coat of paint, even perhaps.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
Shocking.
that's the second stage. However,
Mm.
there's a big however here,
Mm.
is that the current industrial output
Mm.
in America at the moment is lacking behind. So
Mm.
per year they're producing, it's about 1.5 boats per year.
Mm.
To provide Australia with our 2 to 8 boats, they'll need to increase that to 2.5 boats a year.
Yeah.
And everything I've read says that is pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
They're going to be able to jump a whole extra boat per year to meet that quota.
Of course, with such a complicated piece of piece of machinery, I guess,
Yeah.
as a whole.
Yeah.
Do you think that even have the industrial? Do they actually physically have the industrial capacity, or
No,
is it just
not-
a bit of a pipe dream
Not
at the moment?
not at the moment.
Mm.
And I was going to say, if people have been paying attention with the whole quote-unquote supply chain crisis
Mm.
and industrial manufacturing issues across the globe, and specifically in America, we must be cautious about whether we're even going to get these boats.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so that's
Does the price tag change? Like, have they said, look, maybe if you get 2 boats, it's going to cost you 300 billion, but then, it'll scale up, so you get like a bulk buy discount, for example. So then if you get 8 by X time period, are there any conditions?
okay. I haven't actually found that
Yeah.
in my research
Yeah.
per se, but I was kind of looking at the time frame and the fact that that's going to be our first and second phase. So first phase, the boats are stationed here.
Mm.
Second phase, we're going to get between 2 and 8
Mm.
that are second hand.
Mm.
And what I found really interesting, and I'll just get up the name here, is the Congressional Research Service,
Mm.
which is a advisory board in the American Congress, has said to the Americans that you should probably start looking at a plan B, because at
Yeah.
our current industrial output, there's no way we're going to be able to get these boats to the Australians.
Wow. Yet we're still going ahead full steam.
We are going, okay, so I'll get there. We're
Yeah.
going ahead full steam.
Sorry,
So-
full nuclear. We're not
Full
using
nuclear.
steam power anymore. Apologies. Yeah. About 100 years off.
Yeah. So, what this advisory board has basically said is that they should look at a plan B.
Mm.
And this plan B is forget selling Australia any boats.
Mm.
How about we just produce more boats
Mm.
and station them in Australia?
Yeah, valid. Yeah.
So this is a possibility
Yeah.
that in some ways they might just scrap the entire project altogether. We will keep subsidising their industrial sector.
Their boat building.
Over the next 3 years, we are giving them $5 billion to the United States and the UK.
That hurts.
So just a capital injection into their military industrial.
And how does the UK tie into this? Sorry.
Well, because then there's going to be the newly designed AUKUS boats that we're going to be getting laid down the track after the Virginia-class submarines.
Ah.
So the reason I was mostly looking at the deal with the United States, because I think it's what's most important, let's be honest, the United Kingdom is just rather irrelevant in this.
I think that's accurate. Yeah.
So the plan B is going to be, we will just station, the United States will just station boats in Australia. We will not own the boats. We will not be controlling the boats. And instead, they suggested that, how about Australia just buy more weapons off us? How about they just buy more long-distance missiles, ship-destroying missiles, drones, things of that nature. So Australia can just have that stationed all over the Northern Territory in the North of Australia, because that's where they see the adversarial power being, North Australia.
Of course. And
just kind of scrap the whole idea about you guys getting boats, because we're not going to be able to provide them to you. And just the logistics of it is looking so ridiculous that plan B is now being floated.
Yeah.
And so this came up in a Senate inquiry here in Australia with David Shoebridge from the Greens, a senator, was grilling one of the military chiefs. And he was saying, is there a refund clause in this agreement? We're going to be injecting $5 billion in the next 3 years and all the rest. If we don't get these boats, is this just free money to the American military industrial sector?
Yeah.
And the military chief, he just sat there quite red-faced and was like, look, that's above my pay grade. I really don't know. And basically as well, any other questions that have come up, none of Canberra and the Australian political class here is just kind of pretending that this plan B doesn't exist and are refusing to address it whatsoever, because like, no, we'll get these subs, don't worry about it, it's a thing. And then people like David Shoebridge from the Greens are saying, well, hang on a second, the Yanks are now saying, there's voices coming out of Congress that are saying, look, we're going to have to look at a plan B, and this is, a rather strong possibility.
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously no buyback clause, no refunds. All that have yet to be announced.
You're not going to be able to go down with your receipt and just go, hey mate, that money I gave you, can I have some of it back?
They probably won't even give us a receipt, to be honest. Shifty bastards. But obviously it seems that there's, obviously with a policy such as this, having bipartisan support amongst the coalition and amongst Labor, it doesn't seem like there's much hope for there to be any political will for us to pull out, or actually even ask some hard questions, or even, for example, put some conditions on the deal, for example.
No, of course not, because we've tied our entire defence policy to the United States.
Well, that kind of leads me to think that I know one of the main components of AUKUS, of the whole deal, is the increased integration between US forces and Australian forces, and the increase of a US troop presence in Australia, which seems to have been part of the kind of the less publicised aspect of the deal, whereas the main thing that we all heard about was the shiny U-boats, which are actually going to be shiny second-hand boats. And now with this whole Plan B that the Yanks have now looking might have a Plan B of just stationing troops there, is the whole point just to further militarise Australia as an outpost for US power projection into the region? And what do you think maybe the whole purpose of the submarines was just kind of a shiny selling point to soften the blow to the Australian public?
Well, this is what the critics of AUKUS have been saying from the beginning, that it's not about us having our own military capabilities, it's about allowing the United States to use us as a base to project power into the Pacific against, obviously, China.
Well, that's terrifying. And then, I guess, of course, say, for example, in 15 years' time, we don't get delivered any boats, and say there was a shift in the political winds in Australia, and there was an Australian leader or a strong kind of united political front saying, hey, we want, one, a refund, or two, we want you guys to follow through on the deal. I guess by that stage, we've already got a massive US troop presence in our country. Yeah. So I guess almost military occupied by a foreign military. Would you think that be a stretch too far to make that assertion, or do you think?
Look, what I'd just say is look at Saudi Arabia, look at Japan, look at South Korea, massive US troop facilities there, and that hinders them having any sort of independent foreign policy or economic policy.
Despite what their population's on the ground.
Yeah, and then they sell those the troops being stationed in those countries as kind of, we'll provide defence for you, but you will lose any sort of political autonomy. And so that is where Australia is going.
Fantastic.
And if, to all my patriotic Australian nationalists out there, whether you think America is our ally or not, well, it's our ally, whether you think they're a worthy ally or not, losing any sort of strategic autonomy whether that be economic or militarily, is absolutely horrific. That is horrible. No country should wish for that, especially if you believe in Australia being independent, which both of us, I believe, certainly do.
Absolutely.
And as we previously said, we are going to be tied into any US adventurism into the future. And let's look at the past 100 years of US military history.
Yeah, they don't seem to have a good track record since the Second World War, do they? It seems to have been kind of colossal failure after colossal failure at the expense of not only the millions and tens and millions of victims in the target nations, but also the supposed allies of the United States. Because I think, for example, look at the tragedy that's unfolding in Ukraine right now, for example. They seem to have been almost left at the wayside, if that makes sense, as they're slowly now not really being the focus of US foreign policy. It's shifting, obviously, towards the Middle East and towards China a bit more. And so we're seeing less attention, essentially in the media, less attention from the political class. You have people in the United States, openly saying we need to stop supporting Ukraine. And where's that left Ukraine as a potentially wealthy, populous nation in Eastern Europe? Now destroyed. Millions of people have left. Massive brain drain, huge destruction of infrastructure, and they've lost a huge chunk of their land. So it doesn't seem to bode well for allies of the United States that enthusiastically tie themselves this closely.
It's not just about losing the wars as well, it's about the nature of the wars. Like they're not defensive wars that America's fighting. They're imperial wars far away from America for geopolitical and economic interests.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're going to be defending United States ships in sovereign naval waters of another country. So obviously we have to defend them, of course.
So Paul Keating, the former Australian Prime Minister, was on the 7:30 report, and he had some interesting things to say about AUKUS.
He's been pretty much the only kind of outspoken political figure in the Australian kind of mainstream that's really spoken out about this, hasn't he?
He must be in his 80s now, but he's still got it.
Yeah, he's sharp as a tack.
He's still sharp. He still has that wit, tenacity that he's always had. And he was just basically saying, he goes, do you want to be a pair of shoes in the backside of the United States? Because that's where we're going.
Of course. That's
And he did say, he said, do you want your sons and daughters dying on a beach on the coast of Taiwan for America's political gains and strategy?
Well, look, I'm not sure about you, but that's exactly where I want my kids dying. They die anywhere else, but they're not patriotic.
Yeah, and as he said, he goes, these submarines we're getting are nuclear attack submarines designed to go very far away from Australia and launch missiles at a foreign country's military, navy, or possibly, if they're armed with nuclear warheads, at a foreign country's capital cities.
Yeah.
So they're not submarines to defend the coast of Australia. And this is what Keating has always argued. And
obviously, but he was behind the Collins class as well, the implementation of the Collins class.
And what he argued was that those submarines were designed to just defend the coast of Australia because we are a isolated continent that can defend itself quite easily.
Absolutely.
And as he said, and I've heard him talk about this a few times, he goes, if you think the Chinese are going to be able to launch a naval armada and sail, down through Indonesia and approach Australia. He goes, it's going to take 10 days to sail this armada down. Yeah. And he goes, do you think that Australia doesn't have the capability to just pick this thing off?
Yeah, to stop them.
Yeah, he goes, what? He goes, what? Are they going to launch a naval armada to invade Australia? And he said, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, this is just preposterous.
It really is delusional, isn't it?
Yeah,
like, the more we're talking about it now and I'm breaking it down, I think this doesn't make much sense.
But also, like, just per se, regardless of whether it was China or not, if an adversary of any nature was to attack Australia, this is what he argued, that we do have and we can invest in quite simple missile and drone technology and have a navy that can defend Australia's coastlines. Because we're not going to be fighting this continental war like that's happened in Europe over the past couple hundred years, where we're having, trench warfare, tank battles, we don't have an air force supporting troops deploying over mass, huge scale. It's just, we just need to defend Australia as an isolated continent.
Of course,
it's not actually that difficult, and that's not what AUKUS is about. Also, I'll just point something else out. Must give credit to the Australian Citizens Party for this, because they came up with a better acronym for AUKUS, and I thought this was great. You sucker.
That is classic.
Because that's what we are. We're suckers.
We are far out.
Absolute suckers.
That is a good one, man.
It is.
That's
Yeah.
a banger. We are suckers. And that's just seems to be painting a really grim picture for Australia's future. I'm not going to lie. That's quite grim.
It's absolutely horrible,
Yeah.
especially if you contrast it to former policies and strategies. For example, the Whitlam government in the 1970s that wanted to not extend the military bases in Australia. Like Pine Gap for say.
Of course.
He actually wanted America out of Australia. He wanted their military facilities out of Australia because he saw that it was a stain on our sovereignty and our autonomy, which it is.
And where did that get Paul? And where did that get Gough?
Well, there was a constitutional coup that threw him out,
Mm.
and then a massive turn in Australian politics that has, never
We've never really recovered from that, have we?
recovered from it. No.
No. Well, look, in the face of all the massive economic crises that we're going through, this seems to be like a pretty poor investment of public funding, doesn't it?
Absolutely horrible. So, I think that's a good point to shift gears on and talk about a little about the Australian economy and the ongoing housing crisis.
Yeah. So, Jordie, I'm I consider myself a pretty average kind of working class Australian. Obviously, as you grow up, you want to look at kind of settling down and kind of establishing a life for yourself. There's all the things. You start a family, you get a dog, you buy a house.
Yeah.
And
the Australian dream.
That is the Australian dream, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been looking at buying houses, funnily enough, as I feel like I'm at the stage of my life where it's something I might want to do.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, turns out these things are really expensive and really unaffordable.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's just me saying that. I mean, I'm just a lowly construction worker, essentially. But at the moment, I feel like there's been quite a big squeeze of prices. And I think lots of people in Australia are currently struggling to purchase a house. Obviously, we both know the rental market's quite tight as well. And there's lots of problems with, I've read stories about, families that can't find, adequate housing, parents with kids, single parents, etc., even just in the rental market. But I noticed, especially since COVID, we've had probably almost close to like a doubling of house prices in some areas. And obviously we're talking about this massive amounts of government spending on submarines. However, I don't think you'll be able to house hundreds of thousands of homeless Australians that can't afford to purchase a house in a submarine.
No.
I think there's probably just a whole bunch of, like what's your postal address, for example, for taxation purposes. So do you know if the government is actually, I guess every state government kind of has their own agendas and policies in regards to housing, as well as kind of national housing policy. But do you know if there's anything that any kind of governments are doing that are notable to kind of, possibly reduce the pressure on especially first home buyers or protect prospective first home buyers like myself?
Yeah, so there has been in South Australia here and New South Wales. We'll dig into that a little bit in a moment. I'll just say that I did see there was a proposal by the Australian federal government to repurpose the old Collin class submarines.
Oh,
so
yes.
You know how previously people have used shipping containers to build houses?
Yep.
Well, they're actually going to use the old fleet of submarines. They're going to turn them into houses.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
how many people can you fit on a submarine? Like 100 maybe?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not in the Navy. I'm not a naval
Look out
specialist.
the skyline there, guys. You might see some submarines. Reshaped as homes. Okay, sorry. So I was reading an article the other day, and this just really shines the light on what the state of the housing crisis here in Australia. When I say a housing crisis, this is a crisis that affects people on a median average in Australia of about $80,000.
Yeah.
So if you're earning over 150 grand, probably not listening to the podcast or interested in what we're saying. But okay, so basically this was quite alarming, quite sobering. So a full-time childcare worker on roughly $60,000 a year would take up until 2055 to save a deposit for a $742,000 home.
Wow. 2055
Correct.
to save up the deposit.
The deposit.
Goodness. on a house.
At the current interest rates.
Goodness. Yeah.
So
So that
20
is
years.
it usually is it a 10% deposit? Is that the standard?
Well, what they've been doing in all states is just dropping the
Mm.
minimal deposit
Mm.
to be able to get people to
Get people
buy
in.
houses.
Yeah.
So what that's doing is not addressing the issue,
No, of
which
course.
is the affordability, is the cost of the house. It's just making it easier for people to get into debt bondage for
Mm.
their entire life.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yes. So that would be 20 years.
And not
so,
the good kind of bondage for our audience, the bad kind.
so even if a childcare worker was able to take out a mortgage today, repayments on that mortgage would consume 92% of their earnings at current interest rates.
92%.
92%.
Goodness.
So that's keeping in mind that's for a single person.
Yeah.
So if you're a couple, obviously that's still about 45% of
Of
your income.
combined income.
Correct. So it'd be 90% of combined income.
Yeah. 40%, 45%.
45%,
Sorry,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
approximately. Yeah.
So that'd still be if you had a partner, 45% of each of your incomes would
Yeah.
go towards paying off your mortgage.
Yeah.
And then, so retail managers, aged care, disability carers,
Mm.
truck drivers, and general clerical workers would have to save 15% of their average wage for between 11 and 20 years in order to save a 20% deposit for a median house.
That is shocking.
Those same workers would then be required to spend between 60 and 70% of their average weekly earnings to maintain the mortgage based on a 30-year home loan at an interest rate of 8.8%.
Wow. So that's a lifetime of paying a fair chunk of your income to the bank.
Yes.
essentially.
So we will get to that in a moment.
Yes,
So
please.
all the kick-on effects that has in the Australian economy.
Absolutely,
They're
yeah.
massive.
Mm.
What I just add is what we were talking about was your average kind of like baseline working class
Mhm,
person,
mhm.
probably earning about 60 to 80, 70 in between there.
Yeah.
Then also it went on to say that accountants earning an average of $145,000 a year
Mhm.
would have to save for 7 years to raise a deposit for the same house,
Mm.
but would still technically be in mortgage stress with about 40% of their weekly income needed for repayments.
Wow.
And then it goes on to say, worst off over time among the 10 most common professions based on the last census would be general sales assistants, who earning $60,000 on average would potentially never be able to save a 20% deposit for a house.
Mm. So there's a whole section of Australian society that can kiss goodbye
Correct.
to the idea of ever having their own
Yep,
home.
that's right.
Yeah, of
Yep.
course, yeah. And that's obviously, you're saying that's, like you said, that's kind of your median-ish house price of, what, $747,000.
Yeah.
So obviously home ownership is still something that can be realised if you want to live, 50 Ks,
Yeah.
in an apartment 50 kilometres from the centre of your city and, drive for 2 hours to get to work every day. But it's still doable.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel. That's good.
So what they've basically done is in South Australia, I'm not entirely sure about the other states, but I know in
Mhm.
South Australia, and I'm sure there's similar policies nationwide, is they're just scrapping a lot of the government taxation
Mhm.
on housing,
Mhm.
which is fascinating
Mhm.
because that makes up for a large proportion of the tax revenue for state governments,
Of course.
property.
Yeah.
So that's eating into our state government's treasury,
Mm.
which obviously goes back
Things like
into
stamp duty, for example.
yeah,
and,
but that obviously goes back into building roads
Mm.
and providing education
Paying for submarines as well.
and submarines.
Yes.
So that will disproportionately also affect the revenue for state governments,
Mm.
and instead that money will just be going into the financial sector, to banks.
Of course. Yeah.
And what the New South Wales government has now done is they have scrapped the independent regulator,
Mm-hmm.
and this was at the behest of the housing developers lobby
Mm.
in New South Wales. So they've scrapped the
Yeah.
regulator because apparently there was too much red tape.
Yeah. So these people are just the best aspects of our society.
Correct,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
So that there was too much regulation and red tape
Mm.
in New South Wales. So I
Mm.
thought we would scrap the regulator body
Mhm.
and quote unquote let the market rip.
Wow, let the market rip.
Let the market.
So we'll be seeing these submarine skyscrapers before too long. won't
That's
we?
exactly right.
Wow,
And
goodness.
what was fascinating was that the New South Wales government had got a concession that 15% of the new housing would be affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
And the developers lobby said, look, that's too much. It's going to be more like 10%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even that's wishful thinking.
Yeah.
So once the market ribs, and there's...
Once we unleash the market.
When we unleash the market, is that more of that housing that's going to be built is just going to be more luxury apartments, more urbanised apartments and skyscrapers, and it's not going to be kind of affordable, well-designed homes for Australian working class people.
Yeah. I guess that'll kind of perpetuate as well the influx of foreign capital that we have into the housing market as well, because if people in Australia or overseas don't know this, is the Australian property market, due to its exponential and seemingly endless growth, is actually a really good spot to invest money and launder money. So if you're a businessman from overseas, or maybe a slightly less savoury character, like gangsters, people involved in illicit activities, and need somewhere to put your money, the Australian housing market is perfect for it, which then, correct me if I'm wrong, that would continue to drive, as there is still a demand for these houses at these prices, that'll continue to drive the price up further, therefore pushing it further out of the reaches of your everyday Aussies like us.
Yeah, and most of the people that have been coming to Australia, most of the migration is coming from the newly developing middle class across Asia. And so the people that are coming here have got millions of dollars,
of course,
to invest into Australia, or we're just importing really low cost labour as well, like Uber drivers and seasonal workers and farm hands.
Yeah.
So that's obviously not helping with the prices either.
No, of course not. Yeah.
And these policies that the state governments are pursuing are policies not to address the actual cost of housing, the huge period that everyday people will be indebted for the rest of their life, pretty much. And these profits are going to the bank. So Commonwealth Bank just recorded, I think it was $9.5 billion in profits.
Oh wow! Yeah.
In the past year.
And obviously, it's not just housing prices have gone up, and you've talked about these disgusting statistics of, the potential longevity of how long we're going to be in debt for, but I've noticed fuel has gone up. Yep. Fuel is in SA averaging pretty close to $2 a litre, if not if not that.
Yep.
Grocery prices are bloody outrageous. It's $8 for a pack of chips or something. So everything else is rising as well. So do we just eat dirt? Is that the idea? Eat dirt, but don't worry, you've got the mortgage.
Yes, you'll live off bugs, you will own nothing, and you'll be happy.
And you'll be happy. It's starting to make sense now, isn't it?
No, so the other problem is that all of this money that's being invested into the financial sector, into the housing sector, is money that can be invested into the Australian economy at large.
Or submarines, sorry.
So anyway, submarines.
You sold me on the idea in the last segment.
And the problem is that all this money that's being invested isn't money that's going into actual production. It's not going into the hiring of labour and commodity production and manufacturing and a whole other range of sectors. It's just going into pure raw dog speculation, which is...
They're not even lubing you up beforehand.
No, and it's just
raw speculation.
It's just creating a huge artificial bubble within the housing sector and within finance in general, and it's not good for the longevity of the Australian economy whatsoever, because we produce then less and less things.
Yeah.
Our economic complexity, I was looking at a chart recently, is according to, on average from the OECD standards, is right, it's like,
I think we're on par with Cambodia. I think they are more economically complex than we are. Yeah.
So we have a huge housing bubble, and we just export raw commodities. There's no development of those commodities into products, and all of the money that goes into the financial sector is purely speculative, and it's money for the top 10% of Australians, if that, probably more like 5%.
Yeah,
so even if you've got, like, say, you've got one or two investment properties, like you're such a small fish. In the larger scale, it's the property developers and the real estate magnates, people with billions of dollars. So one of the richest, I think, is the third richest person in Australia, has all of his wealth, about $15 billion in real estate.
That's fucking wow.
I was looking at the top 50 richest people in Australia, very interesting. There's 12 of those 50 people all of their wealth is in financial assets, in banking and real estate and insurance.
Yeah.
There's another, I think, 8 that are all in mining.
Mm-hmm.
Notable figures are our billionaire oligarchs, Gina Reinhardt
Yeah.
and Twiggy Forrest. So
Twiggy Forrest, yeah.
once again, just in raw commodity exports and in housing, and those minerals are being exported. Once again, the taxation on them is just so minimal,
and very minimal royalties.
That's
as well.
right. Yep.
I actually saw a report by I think it's the Australia Institute, and I think the conclusion that they came to was at the end of the day about roughly 50% of all our minerals and resources that we dig out the ground are essentially given away for free due to no royalties and no taxation.
Because in Australia, the government, the Crown, owns the minerals, but we
the Crown,
but we don't own any of the mines, any of the equipment, or any of the actual facilities that go into extracting minerals. We just own the minerals, and then we
give them away for free. Because we're such good people.
Yeah, that's
it's that real Aussie spirit of mateship and giving it away for free.
Yeah. Well, and hang on a second. What I just want to talk about while we're on this, and we're talking about policy that can change this, is that Kevin Rudd, Kevin 07, tried to implement a
mining tax.
A mining tax.
Yes.
That's right. The super profits mining tax. And he was assassinated for it.
Politically, not literally, yeah.
The Minerals Council, which is the lobby for the mining industry here in Australia, ran numerous ads just saying that, are you a miner? Do you work within mining? You're going to lose your job. This tax is going to destroy mining communities across Australia. Yeah. But, think about it. Poor Gina Reinhardt. Instead of, being worth 20 billion, she might be worth 18 billion.
Shot. Absolutely. But then obviously we saw after Kevin Rudd's political ousting, which I know for a fact, polling done at the time showed that majority of Australians actually did support, maybe, taking some more, having our share of what is owed to us by the mining companies. But I believe the first thing that Kevin Rudd's visionary replacement, the hero of liberal centrism, Julia Gillard, wasn't the first thing that she did was to just scrap that as policy completely?
Yeah. And she went, I think there was a press conference where she just pleaded to the Mineral Council, please stop the ads. We'll come to the table, we'll stop the tax, just please stop the ads.
But look what happened to Julia as well. I mean, capitulation to these ruthless interests. And she didn't last long.
No,
she was ousted in a party coup as well because she was even more unpopular. She was terribly unpopular. Yeah.
So that was obviously the first policy that was to just kind of just reel in the mining sector and try and get some more wealth that Australia can use from them.
Alas.
Yeah, and then
I keep thinking, sorry to cut you off because you're making a really good point. I just keep thinking these submarines would be so much more affordable if we tax the mining companies.
We do. We could buy more submarines.
We could buy 20 submarines.
That's right. And then look at the next set of policies to try and address the housing crisis by Bill Shorten in 2019, and that was to target that was a capital gains tax and to address negative gearing as well to try and stop that, so people weren't just getting huge tax offsets and breaks from having heaps of houses.
Of course.
And what happened? They lost the
election,
unlosable election.
They did
to Scott Morrison, and
possibly the most uncharismatic figure in politics.
And that policy as well was so minor. It wasn't radical.
Yeah,
it was just to kind of just shift. It was to enact a policy to just kind of shift to make a small little change,
little concession.
Yeah, just a little concession here that would then probably have ripple effects and help with the cost of housing.
Yeah. So obviously, I look at you look at, for example, they always cite countries. I think it's Norway, I believe. They have what's called sovereign wealth funds. So the government gets their profits, and then they obviously invest that into a wide-ranging portfolio. But then obviously the state itself actually accrues the wealth that's gained from that. I'm pretty sure they have over $1 trillion, and that's one of the reasons why they have. All the Scandinavian countries do, but Norway specifically have kind of these really good social policies and standard of living, is because the government actually has the money and obviously the political will to be able to provide such services.
That's right. And then there's that loop, that feedback into then, because the government has the money to inject that into education and healthcare, you don't have to go out and buy insurance and everything. You don't
Absolutely.
have to have health insurance. You have to go to a private school. I wouldn't have to be paying tens of thousands of dollars to attend a university.
Of course, yeah, because we'd be able to fund these things.
Yeah, that's right. And there's similar, like for example, in Qatar, which is not a bastion of liberal freedom whatsoever, but they have like no income tax, like minimal. You don't pay any tax there.
Obviously, their population's far smaller than
Far
Australia.
smaller.
Yeah,
Yeah, but we only have 25 million. It's not like we have a massive,
massive
we don't have
population.
hundreds of million people. And there is their education and their healthcare is subsidised, really cheap housing, and you get to take home your wage.
Your whole wage. Amazing.
Yeah. Because the government actually does own not just the resources, but the actual extraction facilities.
Of course, and I guess the development of those resources.
Right, yeah. But that's what I'm saying. We don't need to nationalise the mines. Well,
we'll get onto that one later.
No. But no, we can just tax them adequately, put it into a sovereign wealth fund, and invest that into Australia. It's so simple.
It is, of course.
Very simple.
So it seems like we're getting rorted on a few fronts here. So we're getting all of our wealth stolen.
Yeah.
What wealth we do have accrued, we're giving away to foreign interests for the world's worst used car deal of all time, as we've just discussed. And then your average Aussie, like you or me, is so saddled down by debt that essentially you can't actually afford to have some sort of pleasant life or pleasant future to look forward to. Because that's what, I guess we can elaborate on this a bit more, but if I'm spending 45+% of my income on paying back a mortgage to the bank, I'd rather be spending that part of my income at the shops, buying something, or I'd rather be able to buy a present for someone, or go down to the local Vietnamese bakery and buy myself a delicious banh mi, or go and buy myself a new car, or we could go out and have a few beers and I'd have the money to pay for those things because I wouldn't be sacrificing on the altar of financial capitalism a huge chunk of my income. So again, it doesn't, and that obviously the less people can afford to spend money on goods and services, that seems, I mean, I'm not an economist, as hopefully our audience has realised. If you think I am, then you're way too far gone. But I think that doesn't seem like, if there's less money circulating in the economy on the ground level, because less people are buying goods and services, buying things from the shops, then that seems like kind of a snake eating its own tail. The problem seems like it's just going to compound and compound and compound.
And you're just looking at it as well from a kind of singular point of view, just consumption from one person. Think about if you're a business and you're trying to start off a business. Think about all the overheads that are all just going to insurance, all your payments on your car, for example. If you own then your mortgage as well on your house, if you want to then rent a building like a warehouse to store your stuff in, all of those rents that you're paying that's going to the financial sector stifles your actual business growth, and it stops people from starting businesses, of course, to begin with.
And then I guess that further perpetuates the control and the hold that the monopolies in various sectors have on our country. Because I guess if the average mum and pop supermarket or greengrocer can't compete, then all that does is provide more of a market share to the monoliths, the Coles and the Woolworths. The monopolies, obviously, and then that gives them more power to dictate prices, to increase their profits, to screw over your average everyday Aussie like us even further.
I went to Woolworths yesterday and I had a coal bag that had some cheese, some yogurt, milk, some chicken breasts and some beef mince, and it was $100 for one bag.
For one bag of produce, $100.
Wow.
That is psychotic. And I guess obviously, you go back 4 or 5 years, it's definitely not that expensive.
No, of course not. That's right. So these monopolies can just jack up prices and just charge rents.
And there's doesn't seem to be any political will to rectify.
We've just talked about what happens when there's policy, real weak policy in my opinion, to try and address it. The rentier class and the media assassinate anyone, and what they've been able to do really effectively is be able to get homeowners. This is just say you own between like 1 and 3 homes. Is that they've been able to manipulate them to think that, well, no, this is in our favour. All these tax loopholes and incentives to buy more property is good for homeowners. Not if you own 1 to 3 homes.
No, of course.
You've got to think about the bigger scale.
And I'm sure lots of these people that may own 1 or 2 homes, maybe 3 homes, for example. Say you have a $3.5 million property portfolio. I guess these are probably the same people who are going to be lamenting the fact that their children
Yeah,
are
that's
never
right.
going to be able to
Yeah,
buy homes,
that's right.
and maybe they
Yeah.
can't see the.
And so many people, I always hear people talking about, the taxes I have to pay to the government, or, stamp duty, all this taxes when buying homes. Think about the rents you're paying on your mortgage to the banks that own your home. And this is the point Michael Hudson, who's a prolific economist, has pointed out, that when housing prices increases and your mortgages become bigger, your repayments become bigger, that's less and less tax that the government can actually
Get
put
off your income
on your property.
Yep.
So if you paid less and less to the banks, you could pay a much smaller percentage back to the government, and then the government could use that to invest back into our society and our community.
Yeah.
But instead, the government has to just keep kind of either decreasing the tax or still try and tax those assets. And then what happens is that the financial sector, the banks, can just keep increasing those rents. And the more housing prices go up, the better it is for the banks.
Yeah.
And another great thing Hudson said as well is he said the churches and the temples and the huge aristocratic halls have been replaced by banks. You look at the skylines in every capital city, it is huge skyscrapers with bank logos.
Financial services.
Yeah, yeah.
Goodness.
They have replaced the old aristocracy.
Of course. Well, that's a terrifying thought. It seems like the way we're going, all the things that we consider about living in Australia and having such a fantastic standard of living, and what separates us kind of from the failed state that is the United Kingdom and the on the verge of collapse continental superpower that is the United States. We've always kind of, I think, been able to have a bit of a different identity and obviously say, hey, look at how much more pleasant our society is. But it seems to me that our social conditions are slowly, actually, well, quite quickly now, starting to mirror theirs.
Because of the rise of corporate, especially financial corporate power over democracy.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, happy thoughts.
That's it. So
Happy thoughts for the future.
let's move on.
Yes.
We've got another interesting topic to discuss.
Absolutely.
So we've previously been discussing about, I guess, the failure of the kind of political centrist establishment, or Tariq Ali refers to the extreme centre. They said that seems to be relevant into what's just happened in the Northern Territory. I believe Labor has just now been decimated.
They have been decimated. They have. This is just as of, I think, yesterday. I believe they held territory elections. It's important for people to remember, if you don't live in Australia, the Northern Territory, as well as the ACT, the Australian Capital Territory, and there's a few other kind of island territories, have a different status. They're not states like South Australia is and New South Wales and Victoria. So they hold a different position in the kind of legal framework of the country. However, we found that, the Territory Labor has just been absolutely crushed in a landslide defeat. They've been in power in the Territory since, I believe, 2016, in which they also delivered a crushing death blow of similar proportions to the party that's just beaten them. So they're called the CLP, they're the Country Liberal Party.
So hang on, is the Country Liberal Party, is that just kind of like your standard Liberal Party kind of like lawyer, but they just have like a really big hat on and they work on like a range?
Yeah, they wear RMs.
Okay.
No, I don't believe so, although the new Chief Minister of the Territory Minister is a lawyer. Her name's Leo Finocchiaro, I believe, and she is actually a lawyer, funnily enough. However...
has spurs on her boots.
Oh, the photos, she doesn't actually, seems to be not spur.
Okay.
She seems to be not spurred.
Yeah.
So she hasn't gone for the full kata aesthetic.
Okay. Yeah.
I think they're trying to be a bit more kind of,
Yeah.
a bit more put together.
Go on.
Although it would be fitting. So they previously, after their defeat in 2016, they'd only held 2 seats. Labor held the majority. Now, as of last counting, I believe they hold 15 seats and Labor holds 4 seats now. So it's a pretty big wipeout.
It is.
The seats that Labor's managed to retain are mainly quite rural, remote, mainly Indigenous predominant communities in these electorates. They've pretty much historically always kind of voted Labor. However, the interesting thing is what's happened is lots of these suburban and urban seats, they have been disenfranchised by the Labor government, and there's many reasons for this, and then therefore they've gone towards the CLP. The Greens, actually, interestingly enough, it's not really Greenie territory, and they didn't secure any seats in this election. However, they have actually managed to get quite a large at like their largest portion of the vote share.
Yeah, increase
ever.
their vote share.
Yeah, increase their vote
To
share
get
as
any
well.
seats.
So from what I can see, it's important to remember as well for our audience overseas, when you watch a movie like Mad Max, for example, that is the Northern Territory. That's probably the most accurate representation that I could give to our overseas audience. Probably a bit wilder, a little bit looser than the rest of the country, I find.
It's very different.
Very sparsely populated as well. A large chunk of the territory is desert, but also, like the rest of Australia, blessed with incredible diverse landscapes, all the amazing stuff. The two major population centres are being Darwin, the capital city, right up the north, and Alice Springs, which is pretty much smack bang in the centre of the country. So you can picture, Australia, which American viewers, I'm sorry, you have to think outside of the United States. But yeah, smack bang in the centre. So there's a couple reasons. So what's happened is there's quite large economic, not mismanagement, but I think they have an $11 billion deficit.
Yeah.
So they've obviously kind of, spent more money than they've earned as a territory.
Isn't always a problem for a government. Government should be spending money.
Or
investing.
They should, yeah, exactly. So that's an issue. But I think one of the issues is as well is that there has been they've kind of screwed themselves from both sides. So they've capitulated to the the mining industry, as we've discussed. They capitulated to the mining industry, but also mismanagement of the resources. For example, they've capitulated to the cotton industry. Now, it's kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about it. Cotton being one of the most water-intensive crops to produce. Yet, for some reason, rice is a similar one, although it doesn't play a part in this context, but in other parts of Australia it does, where you have this incredibly water-intensive, resource-intensive, water-intensive crop to produce, and we're the driest continent on the planet.
Yeah.
I can't really seem to square that circle, but that's all right. We'll move on. So they've, there was actually a Four Corners investigation recently, and it kind of showed how they did an investigation, and it showed how they'd mismanaged water allocation and water rights. So, for example, you had cotton industry businesses that were actually illegally getting more water than they were allocated, more land than they were allocated, and just kind of destroying the natural environment without really any consequences.
Yeah.
Another factor as well is the issue of crime. Yeah. So there's lots of rural, impoverished communities in the Northern Territory as well. Yeah. There's a large percentage of Indigenous and First Nations people as well that live in the Northern Territory. And especially in Alice Springs, there's been a massive spike in crime. I suppose statistically, it's quite a dangerous city. Yeah. It's not really what you'd associate when you think of Australia. Yeah. However, your average kind of suburban, families and voters, they've kind of seen this as being, well, this is quite scary. So the Labor government, out of necessity, had tried to have like a tough on crime kind of stance. Yeah. But what they did by doing that is they alienated themselves from the progressive side of voters, who want more constructive kind of solutions apart from just more policing, more locking up children and stuff like that. Yeah. But then again, they also alienated the right wing side. Yeah. Because they're obviously not tough enough on crime as a political perspective, so they've screwed themselves from both sides.
And then what I'd just say is what intensifies that as well is the media's just constant drumming of the increase in crime and just really focusing on issues in rural Australia, which are real issues, but just focusing on that.
Specifically on those. Correct. And then not talking about really bad submarine deals, for example.
Yeah, that's right.
And again, you think the money that you could have, again, just hypothetically going back to this, that seems to be the theme of the show, but the money that you could spend on rural development and social development in some of these communities, and lots of money is spent in these communities. I'm not saying that it is quite a large proportion of spending, but I don't think it's spent constructively. No. Obviously. But it shows they've suffered the consequence. They've just been completely wiped out politically. So, then if there will be, a swing back the other way, possibly, in the next election, we'll just have to wait and see. Yeah. But it'd be interesting to see, again, how the CLP, the country Liberal Party, takes it, and if there is actually going to be any change for the citizens, for the Territorians.
It also sounds like that the agrarian business class in the Northern Territory just get a free ride.
Absolutely, yeah. Take all the water, pollute all you want, use all the dirty pesticides and chemicals and
Grow cotton.
Grow cotton, fantastic. Yeah, cotton has a really good history in the Western world, doesn't it?
Does, yeah.
So there was one other topic I wanted to discuss with you. This is actually probably a couple weeks old, so for some of our listeners that may be a little bit more into the international news cycle, some old news, but I think it is worthy of discussion because it's quite relevant. It kind of links into our earlier topic on AUKUS and power projection. So this relates to Bangladesh, obviously. Bangladesh, small nation, big population. I think they've got around 200 million people, or around that figure. Don't quote me off the top of my head. In South Asia, obviously bordered by Myanmar, Burma to the east, and India to the west. So recently in Bangladesh, the existing Prime Minister by the name of Sheikh Hasina, they were essentially ousted by a large, widespread student movement. So this student movement, there are obviously there's many societal and political issues in Bangladesh. And this student movement, essentially, there was mass widespread protests. The main one that this was focused on, the main theme was a government jobs quota program that was implemented by the government. So let's wind back the clock a little bit here. After the partition of India, after the British pulled out, you had obviously the majority kind of Hindu population migrated south to India, what is now India, and the more majority Muslim population migrated outwards into Pakistan and Bangladesh, which at the time was called East Pakistan. So it was part of the same political entity, essentially, but they were physically separated by India in the middle. And this...
Can I just add, the British are really good at drawing borders.
Yeah, exactly. They're fantastic.
Yeah, bloody good.
If there's one thing they're good at, it's not cooking; it's drawing borders. But the way this is called the partition of India, and it's estimated like over 1 million people died. So it was widespread kind of chaos. So they existed, and then obviously you had the kind of hostile relations between India and Pakistan, which is still continued to this day. But what happened is East Pakistan, as Bangladesh was known at the time, that was I believe that was Pakistan's primary exporter. So up until the 1970s, when Bangladesh declared independence, they were their primary exporter. So most of Pakistan's export wealth came from Bangladesh. However, Bangladesh and Bengali people and the Bengali language were critically not didn't receive the same amount of resources that the people in, I guess, West Pakistan, or Pakistan today would call it. So I believe they even had Bengali language was banned from the state TV, from state literature and state TV. You had stuff like international aid would be going into Pakistan with the stipulations, hey, you have to give X amount to East Pakistan, it was just withheld. Obviously there was the ethnic tension as well, whereas Bangladesh being comprised primarily of Bengalis, as opposed to Pakistan, which has its own kind of ethnic makeup. So there was a whole bunch of issues, neglect, and then in, I believe, 1970, 1970, a Bengali nationalist party called the Awami League, they essentially won 167 of 169 electorates in East Pakistan.
That's massive.
Huge, massive majority, and then declared independence and were the nation of Bangladesh. Pakistan did not like that at all, so they waged a dirty, horrible war on the people of Bangladesh. It's estimated 3 million people were killed, around that number, widespread ethnic cleansing, all the kind of standard horrors that that happen in wartime. It's quite funny because India supported Bangladesh, the fledgling nation of Bangladesh, and then obviously the United States, Australia, the Western powers, obviously been quite invested in Pakistan at the time already, supported Pakistan, gave them all the weapons, funding to continue this, insane, horrible slaughter. And eventually the Bengalis did win, so They declared independence, they got independence, and then they had to build a nation from there. So the Awami League, the head of that party, was a gentleman by the name of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and his daughter, Sheikh Hasina, was the lady who was just ousted from power.
Yep.
There's a bit more context, obviously. So he was actually killed by the military in the 70s, and Sheikh Hasina, her entire family was killed, but she was away in Germany at the time.
Okay.
But then obviously she's been in power. She came back into power in the mid-2000s, and the Awami League has been, reasonably popular and ruled kind of Bangladesh ever since. They've seen a massive economic growth. They have obviously lots of programs in place. However, they have had a government jobs program which has stipulated that 1/3 of all the government jobs, because Bangladesh is a country like many of the more impoverished nations, lots of the economy is informal.
Yeah.
And there's not as many high-paying jobs.
Yeah.
So lots of the good high-paying jobs you want to get are in the government.
Yeah.
This jobs quota stipulates that about 1/3 of all the government jobs have to go to relatives or descendants of people that fought in the independence war. Which, look, it's not lie, it's a bit of nepotism.
Yeah.
At the same time, they have that country and that nation, they have their own kind of history and their own cultural importances, and so they see that as such an important part of founding the nation that they need to implement and have a policy like that and continue it. But obviously it's led to widespread protests, like all countries in the world, not just poor countries and developing countries, but modern Western countries as well. There's plenty of corruption and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So the student movement, it was originally a student movement kind of based out of Dhaka University. Dhaka is the capital city of Bangladesh. They organised widespread protests over a whole bunch of issues, but this being one of the primary ones.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets interesting, because in all sorts of kind of pro-democracy student youth movements that we see around the world, there's usually quite a few factors at play. So the Dhaka University had received money from the United States, from the US State Department. So you had these kind of NGOs as well that had been pushing a kind of a certain agenda. And the gentleman whose name is Hassan Yusuf, who was elected as the leader of the protest movement and is now the de facto leader of the country since Sheikh Hasina has fled to India, he is actually a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So he's joining the illustrious ranks of people like Barack Obama, who got a Nobel Peace Prize for escalating wars, which is, again, fantastic. However, what he did, what Hassan Yusuf did, he was an entrepreneur. He's just a blatant neoliberal. So he essentially started a bank called the Grameen Bank, which became big in Bangladesh, and it also, I believe, they have branches and stuff around the world, in other countries, I think Europe as well. And they pioneered this system called microloans and microfinance. So the idea is, if you're a poorer member of a country like Bangladesh, you subsist on what we would consider a shockingly low monthly wage or weekly wage. They provided microloans. So it's a loan where you can be, if you needed a small loan, to cover an expense or a fee, like a medical bill, etc., etc. And they would provide these microloans without collateral. And his kind of system of banking was quite new in the world, and pardon me, that obviously led to him getting his Nobel Peace Prize for just the innovations in economic, financial, and social development. And as we know, as we just discussed in our last segment as well, financial services and bankers are the most moral people on earth, and they provide directly to the benefit of society.
Is this basically Afterpay or ZipPay for the Bengalis?
I wouldn't say it's wrapped up in the nice patina, but it is essentially a micro loan.
Well, mine is having the phone, and obviously at a 20% interest rate. Is it?
Well, yes. Well, funny you mention that, because the average Grameen Bank loan repayment is at a 20% interest rate.
Wow.
Shocking. At least ZipPay, you just have your annual fees that you pay, which are quite small. But so that's his history. Yeah. That's the history of Hassan Yunus.
That is heretical interest.
Yeah, that is usurious.
Biblical usury.
That is a usurious interest rate. Oh my goodness,
20%.
Dude, in Babylon they would have bloody hung you up. They'd
They
have strung
would've.
you by your feet.
Definitely, yeah.
Anyways, after the Sheikh Hasina was ousted from power, she penned a letter, and essentially her and her side of the political spectrum have made the assertion that the US ambassador to Bangladesh, a gentleman named by the name of Peter Haas, was actively supporting opposition groups, including the Bangladesh National Party and one called Jamaat-e-Islami, who were a more kind of Islamic organisation. They have, in Russia, they have also been labelled as a terrorist organisation as well. So it just shows that, necessity, when there's an agenda behind a geopolitical agenda, the United States can support whoever they want, essentially. Pardon me, but she said that essentially they were again funding opposition groups.
So the woman,
NGOs, Sheikh Hasina,
Sheikh Hasina, who's been overthrown.
Yes.
She's now asserting that the US, the State Department, were funding and supporting the opposition.
Correct.
The overthrow.
Yes, the overthrow. And of course, obviously, you do have to think, you have to be objective. You can't just take it. I mean, we're anti-imperialists, so we love to say, of course there was the Yanks. But no, you do have to obviously take it with a grain of salt.
They had their fingers in the pie.
But there was obviously some evidence that they had their fingers in the pie.
Yeah.
And another thing that was interesting as well is that she penned a letter in which she was quoted with saying that, this is her quotes, "I could have remained in power if I had left St. Martin's Island and the Bay of Bengal to America. However," she followed with, "I've no intention to go to power selling this country's assets." So what she was pretty much saying was that the United States were looking at building a military base in the Bay of Bengal on this island called St. Martin's Island, and she was told that she would be able to stay in power if she allowed that to happen, and she did not want that to happen. Now, that has been disputed, but the fact that she said that is quite an interesting point, because it obviously provides another level of complexity to the protest. So look, if we see in a year and a half's time, there's a military base in the Bay of Bengal, United States, adding to their 800 plus they have around the world.
Coincidental?
Oh, I think obviously coincidence. But that obviously lends credence to what she was saying.
Yes,
and that obviously illustrates how pervasive the kind of Western imperialism can be in essentially overthrowing and swinging governments around the world to their point of view. And if you think about it geostrategically, I always find the best way to do this is to actually just look at a map and see where things are located.
Of course.
So you see that Bangladesh, where it's located, is right next to Myanmar, which has been in a state of civil unrest for a long time, with the United States also backing certain parties. It also borders India. So what that does there, if, for example, that nation was to fully capitulate to United States geopolitical interests the way Australia is with our proposed submarine purchase, what that would do would be preventing further regional integration, specifically by China as well, because they're obviously building their kind of trade networks and routes throughout that part of South Asia. And I think it's called the String of Pearls or something like that. So they're obviously trying to integrate further as well, and having another nation that is hostile to them at the behest of a foreign power is going to put more pressure directly on them. It also has the other effect of potentially projecting power and putting pressure on India, because the Americans haven't been very happy with India, despite, the BJP government under Modi in India isn't what I'd call a particularly progressive party. They're a neoliberal ethno-nationalist party. I disagree with lots of their kind of policies and their whole platform. However, they have staunchly remained independent.
That's the key word, independent.
So, independence, exactly. And I guess, same with Bangladesh. Under Sheikh Hasina, they were independent. So, especially with, after Russia kicked off their SMO in Ukraine in 2022, India straight up came out to the United States and said, we're not going to stop buying Russian oil and gas.
We're not going to sanction them, no.
Yeah, we're not going to sanction their oil and
We're not going to
gas.
support your proxy war.
Yeah, we're not going to support your proxy war. We don't agree with them, but we're independent. Unlike Europe, which stopped buying Russian oil and gas, has crippled all their industries, and is now buying oil and gas from Russia by India at a massive markup, and therefore India's just creaming it. So again, it comes back to, it doesn't seem to be particularly beneficial to these smaller nations to be completely capitulated to US interests. However, the other side of the argument I wanted to say is that the one thing I think is amazing, regardless of the political direction that this leads, is the fact that you did have a largely, like a massive countrywide ground up protest movement, which actually did oust a government. So it shows that and obviously your average student protester wasn't aware that there's maybe some other hands at work, you know, and and not entirely pulling the strings, but there are certain aspects of it that are pushed in certain directions for certain political points of view. But it just shows how you know, movements like that, specifically student movements and working class movements, can actually change the outcome and change the government in a country. And that's something we have to remember, because we're so desensitized to these things in our liberal democracies. We don't really see political pressure put on politicians by public displays like this, and it's really important that we can learn from this as well. And I think that's a critical thing to remember.
No, definitely.
But that is obviously as well how all colour revolutions play out.
No, well, yeah, that's utterly fascinating.
It is.
And I would just add as well that, talking about colour revolutions as well, that we saw what happened to Imran Khan.
In Pakistan.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes. And that had a similar flavour.
It's a bit contentious. There's an argument that it was internally done by the opposition and the military, that they overthrew him, but he came out and showed a letter, I believe, from the State Department, or sorry, from the American Embassy to the opposition, that was basically asking them to
get him out.
Yeah, to move a vote no confidence to topple his government.
And again,
it just shows you when you have these independent countries that are wanting to chart their own policies, their own course, their own path, is the tools and the weapons that America has to destabilise them and overthrow them.
Of course. And again, it's a similar situation with Pakistan, because Pakistan was crucial to the Belt and Road Initiative for China, whereas being a thoroughfare point, obviously, to rebuild what they're calling the New Silk Road, obviously, and these trade routes through to Central Asia. And
to link up to Iran. So they can,
the Middle East, and then ideally further on to Europe. That's the whole idea. So again, that is super interesting, and again, it has the flavours all over it. And I believe with Imran Khan, they accused him of like corruption or something, or it was like taking a bribe, or it was some really quite a trivial charge. But when you think about the political history of Pakistan, I think blokes have taken some bribes in that country.
They have, that's right. So. Also a great cricketer as well, maybe.
Fantastic cricketer, best bowlers all the time. He's up there. Him and Warnie, mate.
Him.
Top two. That's it. Well, yeah, look, that's pretty much, that's just some food for thought on that subject. Yeah. So, look,
I guarantee it's not going to be the last colour revolution or coup that we cover in Asia.
Oh, definitely not.
There's going to be plenty more on the horizon.
Plenty more to come. And as United States slowly, in the Western kind of bloc, Western extremist neoliberal centrism, shall we say, slowly loses favour amongst the developing world, I think we will see more and more of this at play.
Yes.
Yeah, so look, awesome, exciting times ahead, man. That was a really jam-packed podcast full of tasty morsels of information.
All right, we'll leave it at that.
To our audience, thank you very much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, smash that like button. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for joining us, guys. See you later.